Welcome to the Insum Insider.
Welcome to the Inside. This is the Insum Insider, your source for Oracle Apex tips, techniques, methodologies, and really anywhere that conversation takes us. I'm your host, Monty Latchley, the cat in the hat, coming to you from an undisclosed location just northwest of Houston, Texas. With me, as always, sharing the screen is my good friend and member of the Insum family, Michelle Scamany. Hello, Michelle.
Hey, Monty.
Back at the mothership, at the helm, keeping us on time and task, our producer, French-Canadian, Mark Rule.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thanks, Monty.
It's Thursday, May 14th. And thank you for spending a piece of your afternoon with us, coming to you through the miracle of Zoom. We're 4 clicks into this experiment, and we've covered productivity tools, we've covered deployments, both English and in Spanish. We've covered code review, and today we're going to discuss third-party design libraries. Let me remind everyone, the main reason we're doing this is we miss the interaction that we've come to enjoy when we meet face-to-face at the various conferences throughout the year. If you've made it this far, you've registered through the Insum Insider site. That's where you can reference previous week's topics, the recordings. There's also the Insum Insider Forum, where we end up each week following the live stream, and where we will end up today. Michelle, if you're okay with it, I say we dig in.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Michelle, we've both been working with Apex for quite some time now, and an embarrassingly long time. And early on, you know, an Apex app had a particular look and feel to it. It was pretty easy to spot an Apex app. Many moons ago, I remember everything I did was the sand theme, you know, that tan-looking theme. And having come from hand coding web pages in Perl and using like the PL SQL Web Toolkit, I thought the sand theme was just something pretty spectacular. And, you know, back then it was. But still, it had kind of you know, it was pretty easy to spot an Apex app. You know, most of the time you had your tab navigation across the top, and it was beautiful, but it was still pretty easy to spot. Well, and you mentioned earlier that you still have some things in production using those original themes.
I was looking into my apps earlier, and I found one that's still in production using theme 2. Now, do you remember? Now we're giving away our age, or I'm giving away my age a little bit, but HTML DB 1.6. Do you remember opening up that builder and kind of being presented with those theme options? Like there were, I don't remember how many, maybe 10. And it was like so exciting because you could make your app red or blue or green. And that was exciting at the time. And then it moved into, we got those kind of went not obsolete, they're still running, but we got a new set of themes. And I remember theme 24 was the responsive one. And I was really bummed that all my apps didn't have theme 24. And now we've got universal theme, which is the bee's knees.
Are you going to rewrite that theme 2 app with universal theme?
No, I have to say I take a certain amount of pride in having a theme 2 app still running today. And so kudos to the Apex team, actually, that it's all still backward compatible and working fine. But we have come a long way since theme 2.
We sure have. And if you're interested in maybe what, you know, now that it's not quite so easy to spot an Apex app, if you're interested in seeing what some of the other Apex developers are doing, you can go to a site built with Apex. I think that's what it's called, Built with Apex. And you can kind of see what's out there. You know, I think some of them are actually commercial apps. But yeah, it's becoming more and more difficult to spot an Apex app. There was one also, like, and dovetailing into the talk today, whenever you start employing these third-party design libraries, it's dang near impossible to spot an Apex app without looking at the URL.
That's what I was going to say. The URL is a bit of a giveaway.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
That's true. Well, Michelle, let's get right to the main event then.
Yep.
The Hudson Hornet, Hayden Hudson, and Insum's Vincent Morneau are going to talk to us today about third-party design libraries. You know, when you want to when you have to meet a certain look and feel, like the material theme, material Apex. You know, there's times where you need to extend, and having that available to you, is one of the great things about Apex. It's so extensible. So Hayden, Vincent, thank you very much for agreeing to participate in the Insum Insider. Guys, take it away.
Thank you for the introduction, Monty and Michelle. So as mentioned, I'm Hayden.
And I am Vincent.
And today we're going to be discussing the what, why, and how of integrating Material Apex with Google's Material with Oracle Apex. Let me start by setting a little bit of context. To me, this talk is a follow-up to a blog post I wrote back in March called Apex Should Be Beautiful. And Mark will be sharing the link to that blog. In fact, he already has in the chat. In this piece, I wrote at a very high level about what design options you have as an Apex developer to improve the aesthetic of your application. And I alluded again at a high level to some of the work that specifically Vincent has done to integrate Oracle Apex with Google's Material design. And I thought I owed it to everyone to follow up specifically and bring Vincent to the table to discuss further. So Vincent, would you care to say a few words about Material and your history with working with Oracle and Material?
Of course. Well, first of all, I completely agree with Monty that it is very easy. Back then, it was very easy to spot an Apex application. You had many different themes that you could choose from. Theme 1, 2, 3, up to 20, 25. But you could still basically recognize an Apex application by the look of it. And I remember thinking at the time I started working with Apex, Apex 4.0, and I remember thinking, I looked at all these nice looking apps out there, and I remember thinking, hey, how can I do this? So I started studying CSS, and then it led up to CSS platform, and it just really grabbed me very dearly. So I started to work on many different projects that were integrating external themes into Apex to make them look different. And eventually that led up to a fairly popular theme called Material Apex, which is open source.
My blog is actually based on Material Apex. So
nice.
I have a blog, 2122.io, and I use Material Apex as my theme. And so that was actually my introduction to Google Material through you.
Very nice.
And then you've since gone on to use Material again on a project that we're working on together for All a Beautiful Earth.
That's right. Well, that was the logical follow-up for me, which was to improve upon Material Apex, and FAB.earth, which you can all visit, is an Apex application built with an entire brand new theme based on Google Material design.
Absolutely. One thought that occurred to me as you were talking is I think that there's often a misunderstanding about the design capability within Apex, and so this is a topic that means something to me because when I teach introductions to Apex to different clients, it comes up and again that Apex is perceived as not being a very good canvas for design, and I think that misunderstanding comes from the position that Apex is designed. One of the selling points of Apex is that it is a rapid application development platform that doesn't require you to be a designer. And as a result, it has attracted a community of people who aren't very, perhaps, design-minded, or they have other priorities besides design. But that says more about the community than the platform. There's nothing about Apex that is specifically incompatible with design, as in fact we will discuss specifically when it comes to integrating with other design libraries. So, and added to that, I think because there's this expectation that we are not designers as Apex developers, we are discouraged from moving past the declarative options within the universal theme. But we shouldn't confuse that advice for saying that there's anything preventing us from doing so. There's nothing but the technology of Apex that prevents us from looking past the universal theme and hiring a designer or incorporating any third-party design library that we so choose.
I could not agree more. And something I have to debate probably more often than I would like to is how easy it is to integrate third-party libraries into Apex.
Yes, and just to make the important points, the reason why it is often advised to not go past the universal theme and to content yourself with what the universal theme has to offer. And certainly, I want to make very clear, I'm a big fan of the universal theme. I think many of us would be well advised and perfectly happy to stay within its confines. The reason why we are discouraged from doing so is because if it is not a declarative option given to us by Apex, it means that we have to maintain it ourselves. And so, Vincent, you have carved out quite a task for yourself in For All of Beautiful Earth, because now you have all these templates that you will have to maintain yourself going into the future.
Well, that's absolutely true. And to be clear, not all applications would need to have such a facelift and go to a third-party library. Most Apex applications are data-driven, and they should be kept within the constraints or the framework that is universal theme. So
yeah.
Only if your business requires it, then you can look elsewhere and start implementing other frameworks and libraries.
Yes, and I definitely want to say up top, because I think in the course of this conversation, I'm probably going to imply criticism of the universal theme. I want to be very clear that the universal theme specifically solves some very difficult design problems around representing tabular data that is hard for any design library that I've seen to compete with. So Material, for example, does offer some tabular data representation, but the language of tabular data representation that it offers is not as rich as what Apex has to offer. So where we find ourselves reaching for that third-party design library is perhaps in those cases where we're asking Apex to do something maybe slightly non-traditional. So For All of Beautiful Earth is a slightly non-traditional application for Oracle Apex, not because it's not non-traditional because it's a bad idea, just because the Oracle Apex community is built around representing tabular data in web forms.
Absolutely.
So with that, let's discuss specifically what the opportunity Material has to offer. So why should someone consider Material? And I'll candidate that Material has, if when you start digging into what Material is, there is a very cultish community online talking about how it pretends to solve every problem that life gives to us. And so it's a little challenging to narrow in on how far you want to get into the cult of Material. I will say that it's very clear to me that material solves some key issues from a perspective of, I'll just list them off the top of my head. It solves design consistency across devices. So there's a standard that exists outside of material that your experience going from your computer to your phone, from iOS to Android, will be perhaps specific to the device. Material, I think in its early days, was very focused on trying to give a consistent brand experience across devices. Added to that, and this is where the appeal of material speaks to me more. In my blog, I make the bold, provocative claim that design is a fleeting concept and is always relative. And I want to be cautious in subscribing to the drinking too much of the material Kool-Aid, so to speak. But material does, what it's trying to do is more ambitious than I think what many design libraries do, and I'll specifically call out Universal Theme. Material tries to rethink design from the ground up. And the design choices and the design universe and philosophy that it's created for itself is much more thorough and complete than any design library that I've seen. And admittedly, I am not a student of design. We can go into some specific examples, but before I do that, Vincent, do you want to comment at all on what I just said?
Well, perhaps I want to say a few words about other frameworks available out there, because a lot of people know about Bootstrap. And there are many other flavors of frameworks you can use. What I think stands out about Material as compared to the other ones is that Material offers a lot of insights into their design decisions. Why should the button look like that? How much padding should there be, and why? So it seems that the team behind Material Design has put a lot of effort in explaining their decisions to the public, something that most other frameworks have not.
Yes, that speaks to me. And before digging into this, I had a fairly shallow background in design. Before I was inspired to put together this blog and really roll up my sleeves and really engage with material, I hadn't really given thought to how many choices are apparent in pulling together a design universe. And perhaps that's my cue to start sharing my screen. And we can talk specifically in the context of what material has in contrast to Universal Theme. So why don't I start by picking a little bit on the Universal Theme? And so I feel bad doing it because I love the Universal Theme, and I certainly have a tremendous amount of respect for everything that they've achieved. But here I am.
Hayden, you're not sharing.
I'm not sharing, yes. Yes, so here I am sharing the sample database application. I imagine many of us are very familiar with this, and I chose, I think all of today's examples, I'll try to stick within this application. But an example that I was working on earlier is this one, in which just from the page designer, all you can see is that I've created a series of nested containers on a blank page. And how this renders in the screen is no surprise to anybody. It renders as a fairly clear illustration of page elements, and their relation to each other is quite apparent. But I don't want to lose anybody. But the design choices are not as thorough as what material has to offer. So I'll build into it. So here we see four page elements with different relationships to one another. And we can see quite clearly that these two are sitting parallel to one another within this container, and this container sits within this container. but what's the metaphor? What's the story here? There is an outline around these boxes that maybe could be described as a metaphor of shadow. So maybe this box is supposed to be resting on top of this box here. But the shadow is uniform all the way around the box. So it's not entirely clear where light is supposed to be coming from. If we sort of imagine this as like a stack of, say, paper on a screen, that could be what it is. But then again, it's not entirely clear where this element sits with respect to this element. Is this element below or above this element? It's essentially, there's no fundamental problem here, but there's an absence of deliberation around what the story is. That's how I would put it.
And Hayden,
yeah.
Let me add on to this. Part of my job at Insum is to make sure that we're proactively creating UIs that fit our client branding. And I would say that this kind of layout that we're seeing here, if I could make a complaint about universal theme, is that it is too easy to create layouts that look like this. You keep adding stuff and you essentially start creating boxes in boxes in boxes.
Amen.
So having some sort of UI guideline, and such as the material guidelines, help preventing that sort of layout.
Yes, and without further ado, so we've talked, we've alluded to material, but we haven't shown any of material. Let's break the suspense. So material can be accessed at material.io. And what you'll notice is that, say, unlike Twitter Bootstrap, and I'll bring that up on my screen as well, when you go to Twitter Bootstrap, you're immediately presented with download Twitter Bootstrap, and you're immediately given HTML. I want to say, I want to make it clear that material pretends to be something a little bit different. And I'm not saying that it isn't, but you actually have to dig quite far into this website before you're given HTML. So the first tab is not download or here's the HTML. It's design, and the philosophy of design is expounded upon in great detail. But we don't have to get into that. I think if you want to read this, you're strongly encouraged to, and they can represent their design principles far more eloquently than I can. I want to focus on comparing material with Apex. And so with that in mind, I sort of built up a criticism of universal theme. What do I mean by that? So if I go to components and say I take a look at cards, which is sort of a box concept, let us just put them side by side. And maybe what I was saying earlier might make a little bit more sense. So I talked about how this edge here in this box might be described as a shadow. Here, there's no question that there's a shadow. The story of what this box here is with respect to its background is incredibly obvious. And that's because material has exhaustively thought through what the metaphor is. And material, the word, references the metaphor of physical material. And they have this very rich philosophy of using quantum paper. And so throughout the material experience, you see various metaphorical representations of paper, and it's magical paper. It blends, it breaks, it has magnetic properties, it mends. But let's focus on this simple example here. We can see that light is coming in at a very, we can easily intuit the direction from which light is hitting this card. We can see that the shadow is very thoughtfully presented on this border, more strong on this border, and there's essentially no shadow along these borders. So the metaphor is very clear. And that's just one small example, but I think a very rich one, of how the material universe is just more deliberate, and how they've thought through design from the ground up. So if I'm starting from the position that design is just a flash in the pan, it's a fleeting concept that's always relative to other things that exist out there, Google is coming at me with the answer, well, will paper as a metaphor ever go out of fashion? Will communicating relationships between elements using color and elevation and motion ever go out of fashion? It's what they're going for here is more ambitious than most design libraries. So Bootstrap doesn't pretend to be timeless, but Material does. And so obviously only time will tell, but but I definitely just want to hammer home this idea that the Material is trying to solve something that is much bigger than what we typically are looking at as Apex designers.
And to be clear, on the elevation, the representation of the depth we're seeing here is only one of the flavors Material has to offer. Depending on the type of component you're using, the positioning on the page, the depth will adapt and change. So having access to this library with all the design decisions regarding the depth is very powerful.
Yes, and how about I very briefly share my mobile phone screen and give what I think is a powerful demo of Material in the context of a native application on your phone. So motion is an important part of the Material design specs. And so beyond just expressing relationship and meaning through elevation, we can see as I click into one of the tiles of my Google Calendar here, the tile lifts and expands across my screen, pushing the other objects out of the way. So it's very clear from whence this new content comes from and how it relates to its parent content. And there's also an energy to how things move about the page. It accelerates faster than it decelerates, which communicates energy and momentum and sort of a willingness to serve that is very powerful. So all of this is very inspiring, and this is why myself and Vincent and others are tempted to integrate Material into an Oracle Apex context.
Gentlemen, we have one question that came in.
Sure.
And it is, what about Bootstrap? It's easy to integrate. Is it recommendable to use?
Absolutely. So in my blog post, I listed third-party design libraries you might consider, and I listed Bootstrap and Material side by side as though they're roughly equivalents, just offering different design aesthetics. I think we've spent some time talking about how they're different, but really, that one thing that's fundamentally true, it is possible to copy and paste HTML, CSS, and JavaScript from either and put it into Oracle Apex. I've integrated Twitter Bootstrap into Oracle Apex applications many times, and it's easily as advisable as using Material.
Thank you.
Absolutely, and Bootstrap, to me, is the biggest toolbox of the CSS frameworks, which is it comes with so many utility classes that you can grab and use for making your components look different. It's very comprehensive. You have to study a Bootstrap a lot in order to leverage its full potential. And also one of the advantage of Bootstraps is that there are so many higher level frameworks, so themes on top of the framework that you can grab and use in your application as well. So that means actual designers took Bootstrap, made a couple of templates of page templates, profile pages, login screens, product details page, and you can basically grab that code and use it in your apps as well.
Absolutely.
We also had another question, which is any recommendations for a good reference on how to integrate use material design in Apex?
How about this? We can do a demo right now of how to do it. And
Sounds good.
we actually have 2 resources for you. So for those of you eager to get started with code, never fear. 1, I'll do a live demo right now. And 2, I'll have a, I'll publish a YouTube video tutorial that more or less captures the same thing, but just at a slower speed. So if I go a little high level and a little fast right now, and I don't explain everything, I'll have a YouTube video that will explain everything from top to bottom. So without further ado, I will resume sharing my screen. And so here we are back. We have got Apex on the left and material on the right. The question is, where is this HTML? So just to review, to integrate a third-party design element into your Oracle Apex, you need 3 things. You need your CSS, you need some JavaScript, and you need HTML. So where are these things hidden in the material website? We can start by finding the CSS and JavaScript, and that's actually very easy. If you go to develop, so you start at material.io, you go to develop, and you're presented with this screen here that communicates the fact that Material is very focused on solving design problems across all devices and platforms, but we're, as Apex developers, interested in the web typically. So we click into web, and we click into web quick start guide. And immediately we're presented with the content delivery network that that Material has to offer. And of course, Twitter Bootstrap has a very analogous thing that you can include. I'll advertise here that there are many workflows by which you can incorporate Material into Apex. This is probably one of the easier ones. So essentially, what we can see here is we already have 2 of the 3 elements that we need. So as I said, you need the CSS, you need the JavaScript, and then of course, there's this 3rd one here that I also recommend including, which is the CSS for a material icon. So essentially, you have 2 CSS links to include and 1 JavaScript link. And then I've already prepared this earlier, but I think nothing is lost by not doing this live. We can see in my sample database application, under application definition, I navigate to user interface, and as you hopefully already know, or as you may already know, under user interface, there's a section waiting for you to add personal or third-party JavaScript libraries. And so here I've pasted the Material Components web min JavaScript library in the JavaScript file URLs section. And then under the cascading style sheets section, which is right below it, I've included both the Material Components CSS library and the Material Icons library. So I just lifted it from here and pasted it here.
And
So
Hayden, to be clear now, by pasting those 3 links only, you have access to the entire Material library.
100%, just as with Twitter Bootstrap. So you include the content delivery network, and there's no more CSS and JavaScript that you need to, that is fundamentally left to be included to make Material work in your application. There are options for how to possibly add less to your application, but we don't have to get into it. So we have 2 of the 3 things, CSS and JavaScript. Now we're missing the HTML. There are many HTML repositories available to you, and there are many ways to go about writing your HTML. I recommend navigating to the bottom of any one of these material.io web pages and finding the link to the GitHub page. From there, navigating into Material Components web. And then there, you'll find a link to a demos website, which I am a big fan of. It's the link, and we'll share this to the group, is material-components.github.io. And here you see this very friendly website through which you can interact with all of the Material components. So we see buttons, we see cards, checkboxes, chips, data tables, drawers, elevation. And if we say click into the card component, of which I'm a big fan, you can see this, this page here where, for starters, you can see how versatile this component is. And it gives you various ideas for how you might rearrange the material components, HTML elements to in different combinations to result in really quite different manifestations of the same fundamental concept. And then for each one of them,
now that could be seen. That could be seen very closely to template options, where you simply toggle options and you see the layout being changed in real time.
In universal theme? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So at no point do I want any of what I'm saying to, I always want to give universal theme credit where it's due. So much of what is great about material components is actually already available to us in the universal theme. I highly recommend everyone carefully explore the universal theme application. And we can see, for example, that universal theme also has a cards component. And that also gives rich examples to inspire you to use this component in various ways. So again, this is a rich component that is available to us natively in Apex. And let's not overlook it to go immediately to material components. But Vincent, would you say that what the universal theme has to offer is as rich and as versatile as what material components has to offer?
So there's the tricky question, right? This is the source of an endless debate. I would just say that at the end of the day, it's a matter of taste. But it's also a matter of what your business requires you to build. All of what we're doing right now about the how to integrate material into Apex is the fun part. But the most important part is the why. Why should you do this? And to me, Apex has already, I don't know, 30, 40 templates that you can choose from, whether it's page templates, regions templates, report templates, such as the card one right now. And even for each one of those templates, you have template options. So you can tweak some smaller details about your templates. But no matter how many templates you're going to have, even if the next universal theme version comes out with twice as many templates, you are never going to be able to build everything. And if ever a requirement comes your way where you have to build something that is a little out of the Apex comfort zone, then the skill of being able to integrate external libraries such as material becomes an incredibly important skill. So is it better looking for the material? Well, if you ask me, I'd say those cards look better, yeah. But who knows, maybe in the next universal theme, there's going to be an even better looking card. What this speaks to me is, am I able to integrate that into Apex? And the answer is yes.
And in prepping for this demo, in fairness to universal theme, we specifically chose the component that we think puts Apex to least advantage. So there are, well, I won't put words in your mouth, Vincent, but I think of all of the components, the difference in the card capabilities is one of the most expressive of the advantage of using material components.
I would say that's true, but it's also because of the fact that material will eventually give you the code structure that you need to use to recreate those components in Apex. And as soon as you work with code instead of template blocks, then the flexibility is just in another level. You can create anything when you understand the code that goes behind the component.
Yes.
So Hayden, do you mind switching to the other tab where you actually see the code behind those components.
Yes. So as I navigate across these different suggested combinations of HTML elements, I get the corresponding HTML that corresponds with each one. And so now we have the third missing piece for how to add this to our Apex application. How we add this is, we have a lot of choices here. I'm going to suggest an option that I think is, that probably will get the most approval from Oracle Apex experts, which is to remain subscribed to the universal theme, because the universal theme is great, and just add to the library of templates that that the universal theme has, and work within the universal theme architecture. So with that in mind, and now we sort of get to why I chose the sample database application. The sample database application has pictures, and we like this card thing here, and it also has pictures. So I want to take these images from this products table and transform it into something that maybe looks more like a blog or a shopping website to include these cards. So for starters, because we know that there is a native card option available to us in Apex, we can start by simply translating this table into a table that uses cards. And I've already done the work. And in my YouTube video, I'll do the work again in more detail, but I'll just jump right to what, again, this is only using native Apex capabilities. This is what that same table looks like using Apex cards. So obviously it's, this is not using material components yet, but there are no images, and obviously it looks very different than this card. But we are one step closer to you being able to leverage this HTML here. So let's take a look at the architecture implicit in this material card. So if I can just get, so to use the card theme, you have to switch to a classic report, and under attributes, you toggle to the natively available cards theme. So what we want to do is leverage this architecture to include a new row template. So I'm going to navigate to under shared components, my templates. I'm going to find this cards template. So it's going to be under a type of report. I see my cards template here. I'm going to copy it. And this is key. I don't want to edit the existing template because I want to stay subscribed to the universal theme. And I'm going to add a new template. So I'm going to call this template material components cards. You can see I've already done this. And I'm going to copy this.
So just to add on to what you just did, what you're doing is you keep the subscription going, so you're not too far away from universal theme. In fact, you're staying within universal theme, but you're taking ownership of a new template that will continue living even as universal theme upgrades.
That's right. And so any template that I create, I am there from that point onward responsible for maintaining. Oracle is not going to maintain this template for me. So I'm taking on a responsibility here. So I have my, so I still have not integrated any of the material components HTML, but I now have this input area where I can add HTML. So let's examine how this works just a little bit. We see that it currently operates using list element architecture. And then within it, this is the current HTML for the native Apex card element. So, and then we can see that seeded into this HTML are these substitution strings. And these substitution strings allude to the names that I've given the fields in my SQL. So card title, card text, card subtext, etc.
So they're the column aliases from your SQL query.
column aliases. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. So navigating back to my templates, I want to find my the template I'm seeking to edit. And so what we now understand something important about how this works. We understand that this architecture depends on using the list logic. But just for the sake of clarity, I'm not going to switch to a local code editor. And here I'm just going to create a temporary HTML file. And into this file, I'm going to paste this HTML. So there's a little button in here for copying. So here is the material HTML. I know that I need to use the list architecture. I'm going to give this list element a custom class. And I explained a little bit more about why that's necessary in my YouTube video, which I will release. And then let me just add a few substitution strings so we can see this in action. So this will become card image. And this will become title. And let's just stop with, do the whole thing, and this will just be card text. Okay, so I'm going to copy and paste this back into my Apex application. And I'm going to apply changes. And now back in my, in the page where I'm applying the native card theme, I'm going to switch from that card theme to use my material components cards, which I just created. And voila, we see that with just a combination of the content delivery network, JavaScript and CSS, and the copied and pasted HTML that I have here, along with some like a smattering of custom CSS, which I didn't show, but I do show in my YouTube video. I'm able to pull together something that looks nice and is clearly not native Apex. So we can see the much lauded subtle shadow choices here. And
I think it's worth noting that the exercise you just did of copy pasting and changing the substitution strings inside of Apex is the core of everything you want to import. So as you start understanding this, you can copy paste anything from external libraries such as material. It is really all there is. And there is very little code involved because you're essentially copy pasting code from Google or Bootstrap or another.
And it's of course possible to go much more ambitious with this. At Fabi, we have actually unsubscribed from the universal theme.
So Vincent,
actually, sorry, Hayden, can I ask you to elaborate on that? Why would you have done that?
Maybe
I should take this one. Is it about Fabi? Why we unsubscribed?
Yeah. So at Fabi, we went a step further, and so we did something much more ambitious than what I just demoed. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So actually, what we just did is integrating a single component. What a lot of plugin developers are doing in the Apex community is exactly that, but they're wrapping it inside a plugin, so you can easily use it in Apex. So that is very useful for integrating small components. But as you want to adapt more and more components, and especially when you start looking at the navigation bar, the side navigation, the overall look and feel of all buttons, the form inputs, And as you start changing everything, then it only makes sense to unsubscribe from a universal theme and start from scratch. Basically, the most important component that should drive your decision is the page template. If the universal theme page template does not fit your need, it makes very little sense to stay within universal theme.
Gentlemen, we have a few questions that have cropped up during the demonstration. May I put them to you?
Please.
The first one is, I'm working backwards right now. Will it still work if you don't integrate the CSS file in shared components?
So long as you include it somewhere that is accessible to this page, that's fine. So you can put it in the, so there are many locations, as you may know, to include CSS. Apex is really quite versatile in that respect. So for example, on the page itself where you want to include the component, there is a header section that allows you to include CSS file URLs. So depending on how widely you plan to use your material components, that could dictate the answer for where you might choose to include the material component CSS. But you do need to include it somewhere that is accessible.
Also, if you're not comfortable pulling the CSS and JavaScript from CDNs, you can also download it yourself and serve it from your own server.
Absolutely. I didn't think to interpret the question that way, but yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Next question is, how do you overcome performance as this adds extra resources, that's JS and CSS, at runtime?
Yes.
Well, if it's a web application, I feel like the question is not relevant because like there are no performance hits to including the CDN library. Would you agree with that, Vincent?
Well, yes and no, because there is a performance hit for serving the files. You still, the client machine still has to download them and parse them. In some cases, that's almost non-noticeable, but in some cases it is. If you were to import the entire material component library for using only the card template, I would argue it doesn't make sense. So our demo facilitates importing the library for demo purposes. But really, if you wanted to do this in a production application, you probably would want to grab only the card components.
All right. There's another question here. Is there any conflict between UT and material classes?
Yes. So you will find that the way it looks on the material website will render in different ways in the context of the universal theme, and the differences will be subtle. So you will have to develop some comfort level with targeting your own CSS just a little bit to get it to where you want it to be. But the yeah, so definitely there's a little bit of conflict, but I don't think it is a showstopper by any stretch.
For example, we've noticed that universal theme font size, especially for buttons, is much smaller than the buttons for material.
Yes, and you might actually think it. There's room for disagreement there. Vincent, I think I remember you said that you like the font size default in Apex.
So I was saying that just like you, it's not a showstopper, but you will be finding those subtle differences. And it so happens that in universal theme, the CSS for button font size is stronger than the CSS for material. So it overrides the material font size. So right. You will find those small differences.
Okay, we have another question. Could you please explain how did you integrate the CSS files as well, please?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So I didn't mean to do that too quickly. So the key thing is, and this is an easy question to answer. So you come to material.io, you click into develop, you find web, assuming you're building a web application, you click into Web Quick Get Start Guide. And here you get the first rubric under Getting Started is a reference to the Content Delivery Network. And so the question is, how do you integrate the CSS file? So you can see it right here. It's a link, HTTPS all the way through to, sorry, it's the wrong one. Is this first one here, HTTPS all the way through CSS. I copy that link, and in my application, I will go to edit application properties, user interface, and there's a section here for cascading style sheets. And that's where I paste the CSS, the link to those Content Delivery Network CSS. But depending on what your considerations are, there are other ways of doing that, as we have just discussed.
Hayden, I might just say that just to remind everybody and reassure everybody, you will be sharing all of the sort of how in more detail in your YouTube video, correct?
Yes, I recognize that some of this is quite detailed, and I didn't want to put too much pressure on our live chat to solve all of the technical issues, which is why I created a YouTube tutorial that covers this in careful detail. So as I speed through these choices, you can slow down, you can pause, and I'll have links and stuff like that. So for those of you looking to just get the developer perspective on how to implement this, that I will deliver a YouTube video that will answer your questions.
We also have a few more questions to answer. The next one is, I have an app on Apex 5. It does not exist universal theme. If it needs to display in mobile, what's the best option to do the current app responsive?
Well, I believe Apex 5 has some responsive capabilities. Ever since 4.2, Apex was able to do responsive in their themes. But the obvious answer is just upgrade.
Okay.
And I'll direct people while I'm sharing my screen. The universal theme has this really great resource for migration guides. So no matter where you are, it's worth reading this migration guide to help you understand what the opportunities are and how easy it is to switch from 5 to the universal theme. So like I would recommend reading why migrate, migration steps, stuff like that. So most of the hurdles that you may come across will be addressed by the universal theme application. And the link to this is apexoracle.com/UT, like that.
And
Hey guys,
there's, sorry, go ahead, Monty.
Mark, yeah, the questions keep coming in. I think this conversation could just go on indefinitely. It's such an interesting topic. The questions keep coming in. We need to at some point move these questions to the forum. If your question didn't get asked, we can go ahead and post it.
Let's do the next one, Monty. I think it's a really good one, though.
Okay, sure.
Vincent, which one are you talking about? The Chrome Developer Tools, or?
Yes.
Okay. So the question is, under Chrome Developer Tools, there under Networking, there is the Coverage tab that is able to give a metrics or used and unused CSS and JS. How would you exclude unused CSS and JS?
All right. So the reason why I think this is a really good question is because now we're talking about trying to save kilobytes of data by being transferred from the server to the client, which in some cases, if you're dealing with application with millions of users, is going to be important. So of course, you do not want to serve big files, especially if they're not being used entirely. If you are in that type of scenario, I would highly suggest to look at some build tools. So what we've been doing now is essentially loading the entire library into the page. Not very efficient, but easy to implement. If you're using a build tool, you're able to selectively pick which components you want to use for a given page of your application. So Disclaimer, I am the author of Apex Nitro, so I encourage people to use it, but there are many build tools you can use for Apex.
Can I squeeze one more in? And
Sure.
I think this is a good one. Any recommendation for a good reference for understanding the fundamentals of Apex design, i.e. templates, themes, etc.?
I think the universal theme is the way to start. So the universal theme is a beautiful application that reads very well. And so no matter how experienced you are, I think you will always be rewarded by coming back to the universal theme and just looking through all of the options. And of course, one of the beauties of the universal theme is that with every new release of Apex, the universal theme itself will carry the latest and greatest information.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll pull rank because I have a question of my own before we shut down. Hayden, is automated testing, or you guys have gone through a lot of the benefits of going with these third-party design libraries, how to incorporate them, but what about automated testing? Is there any complications if you're using a third-party design library with Cypress, which you're familiar with, or Selenium or anything like that, or there is no complications whatsoever?
It's a very interesting question, and one that I hadn't anticipated. I will take a stab at answering it. I think that the complication of using a third-party design library is that it may happen that your elements will no longer be accessible from the page designer. So this is not the case in this particular example. But if you're building a lot of HTML that doesn't correspond to objects that are represented here, or at least the relationship is not very strong, it means that you have essentially fewer options to help your test automation framework. So if your framework depended on having a bunch of custom attributes to hook onto to test for their presence or absence, the ease of being able to implement that solution might be a little harder if essentially you don't have access to those elements in the page attributes, in the page designer.
All right, thank you. Again, this conversation could go on seemingly for the rest of the afternoon. We have to get back to work. We are going to monitor the forum. If your question didn't get into the presentation, we'll answer it on the forum. Hayden and Vincent have agreed to spend some time there answering your questions. We have upcoming on Tuesday, and we have our first French speaking presentation, and it's going to be on EBS extensions using Application Express. It's not one you're going to want to miss, and that is with Francis Mignot, Patrick Monaco, and Sylvain Martel. Next Thursday, we're going to have a real treat. Francis is going to be on again with David Peak from the Oracle Apex team. So, and Michelle, I understand you might be taking next Thursday off. You never take a day off. What's up with that?
You're muted, Michelle.
I was muted. Rookie mistake. I was saying I'm going to let you handle the show. Take it away.
It won't be the same without you. It will not be the same without you, but we'll try and make do. So join us Tuesday if you're a part of the French-speaking audience and you want to know more about EBS extensions. Join us next Thursday if you want to get in on a conversation with David Peak around forms to Apex modernization efforts. That's a pretty broad topic, and we'll try to cover it as best we can. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Hayden. Thank you, Vincent.
Thank you. That was fantastic. I have a newfound respect for. I knew you guys were smart, but this was next level.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Mark. And we'll see you next Thursday on the Insum Insider.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
Bye.
Thank you all.
You've been listening to the Insum Insider.